So fantastic to be here. Thank you very much. Can I just double check that you can see my screen there?
It works perfect. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. So glad to be here. My name is Bowyer. I'm co-founder CEO of Kleos Space SA. We're a Luxembourg-based company listed on the Australian Stock Exchange under ticker KSS and a Frankfurt Stock Exchange under KS1. So just getting into who we are and what we're doing. We're a business that was started in 2017, listed in 2018, and what we're doing is we're using satellites. We're space powered, if you will, using satellites to deliver data to the defense and security domain. Specifically, the sort of data we're collecting is what's known as signal intelligence data or geospatial intelligence data. We've got two data products that cover those items off. We're using our satellites, which are completely unique to us. We're the only people in the world flying the satellites in the way that we're doing, which I'll explain a little bit more about that technology as well. Downlinking data down to the ground and processing that data again through proprietary algorithms to create a very accurate picture as to what's going on around the world. It's a little bit ethereal because we're working on radio transmissions. We're wanting to locate where the use of the radio spectrum is happening, which really means where communication devices are happening, which really means for our customers where there's human activity. So that's the interesting thing from an end user perspective. People around the world, government agencies, defense agencies, corporates, commercial entities, want to know where people are and what they're doing, particularly where those people aren't where they're supposed to be, whether it's by the borders, around your overseas assets, whether it's in the middle of the Amazon performing some illegal mining, but they shouldn't be. There's a human activity around the world, which is often dark and unseen. And what we're doing is we're shining a light on that, currently that hidden activity. The way that we monetize that data is we sell access to our database via subscription, i.e. a license to our customers. Our customer has a license to access or to view the database, to tap into it. The more they pay for that, the more access to the data they get. The more satellites we have in space, the bigger the database gets. So it's a truly scalable business model. I think what's important as well for people to kind of wrap their heads around, as well as that, as they're seeing us grow as a business, the more satellites that we're launching doesn't just increase from a linear perspective the value of the data in that database. It also increases it exponentially with regard to the utility of that data. I use an example quite often in the finance sector, which obviously everybody listening to this is very well understands very well, is that if we have one cluster of satellites, one set of satellites in space, it's the equivalent of us delivering data, let's say a stock ticker price once a day at the beginning of the trading day. Which is interesting to people, and people will pay for that. That's interesting information, particularly if you had no idea what that stock ticker price was before. However, as you start to build more data and put more data into that database, you're able to access that stock ticker price more often. It becomes more operationally useful, and it gives you the ability to make more money out of that information, because it isn't just academically interesting once a day, but it gives you that information near real time, which means that you can start to react to things as they happen. And it's the same with intelligence around the world, whether it's in the defense sector or it's in the finance sector, that business intelligence, using data to power insights with regard to what's going on. That's a really, really important thing. So just a quick one on the technology there while we've got the picture of the satellites up. Do go in there, just fueling up on some coffee this morning. We uniquely fly clusters of 4 satellites. So our satellites are quite small. Imagine them as very large shoe boxes or a small suitcase sort of size, absolutely packed full of technology. They have propulsion systems on board, they have radio antennas, they've got systems on there to make sure that they fly in the correct order and in the right place. solar panels for powering them, batteries, communication devices, all those sort of good things, antennas picking up the radio transmissions. So we fly these very complicated, fairly small, powerful satellites quite close together as a cluster. We fly them in a pseudo diamond formation, 2 pairs in 2 different orbits. And what that does is it gives us a unique capability to very accurately locate radio transmissions on the ground. The physics are physics that everybody will be familiar with. It's physics that your phone uses, your car uses every day to locate itself using GPS. It's called multilateration. So the way your GPS system works in your phone or in your car is it's receiving signals transmitted from multiple satellites, usually picking up at least 3, 4, or 5 GPS satellites around the Earth that are transmitting their location and timing information. They transmit to your to your receiver on your phone or in your car, and it calculates its position in relation to those transmissions from the GPS satellites using a series of algorithms. If, however, what you're wanting to do is locate something that doesn't want to be found, it isn't saying where it is. So a transmitter on the ground, such as a handheld walkie-talkie, etc., it's just transmitting openly into the atmosphere. We need to collect that radio transmission at different points. So this is why we use a cluster, which is why we have to collect at different satellites. Each one of those satellites collects that radio transmission. The satellites are about 100 kilometers apart, 550 kilometers high. They're flying at about 16,000 kilometers an hour around the globe. They're collecting all those radio transmissions because they know where they are in relation to the Earth. We can do some calculations, time difference of arrival, frequency difference of arrival calculations to work out where the radio transmitter is in relation to those 4 different points, because the signal was received at a slightly different time in each of those satellites. That's how we do the maths. It sounds all very complicated, and obviously it is from a ground processing perspective. All of these things add to our moat, if you like. Because we're uniquely doing the calculation with 4 satellites, this gives us an improved accuracy with regard to the ground transmitter. We released a technical paper just last week on the technology, debunking the myths, how it works, and delivering some real-world accuracy numbers. And we can locate a handheld radio transmitter down to a few hundred meters, which is an incredible capability that you can offer into the defense security domain. Anybody wanting to look at protecting borders, protecting against illegal fishing, etc., smuggling, all those things, because you're able to accurately identify where somebody is, where they shouldn't be. And on the ground, these radio transmitters are freely used. People can't, you can't locate them from the ground perspective because the radio transmission itself coming out of, let's say, a walkie-talkie is limited by the horizon. So at standing level, that's about 3 miles. So they get located within a relatively short amount of area, which obviously from an ocean perspective is basically they're hidden. If you're in a mountain and you're using a walkie-talkie, you're hidden. Apart from the fact all those radio transmissions go to space, and that's where we pick them up and collect them and do the location. So it's a very, very powerful data set which adds value to lots of other data sets as well. We sit very nicely in the Earth observation domain, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance domain, where we're sitting in alongside the imagery guys, people taking photos, people doing synthetic capture radar, and all those good things. And we work very nicely alongside those data sets as a complementary data set, reducing time for the analyst and adding value. So in terms of the business plan, if you like, very, very simple. We're collecting information about radioactivity, human activity in the maritime environment and on the land environment. And the model is simple. We leverage our CapEx, our assets, which is our satellites in this space, observing the Earth, recording the radio spectrum, and we're collecting that data once with that satellite. That data comes down to the ground, processed on the ground. This is where it's really important with regard to the business model. We can deliver that same data set unlimited amount of times. The limitation is clearly the market size and the amount of customers that are around that. There's a limit to that, evidently. but we can sell that same data set over and over and over again. And importantly, our customers don't own the data. They own a license to access the data. So there's nobody that has exclusivity. This, I think, is a fundamental difference between if you're used to looking at space stocks or space companies historically, they tend to be communication satellites. Communication satellites have a capacity. So they have the ability to sell a communication capacity for a period of time, and once that's sold, it's sold. They can't scale beyond that. And that's a really nice model to understand because you understand how to leverage those assets and make money. However, with our satellites, we don't have that limitation, and we have the ability to scale beyond that. So just a bit on our timeline here. The company, the technology, the intellectual property, the original sort of starting seed money, if you like, and everything that came out, actually came out of a UK space engineering company called Magna. It was traditionally a old space company working with the European Space Agency, other agencies around the world, developing scientific instruments that are measuring either parts of the spectrum or doing technology development. So something that was, Kleos was born out of, if you like, the space industry that had been around a long time. Magna has been around since 2005, and which I co-founded as well in terms of that business. And it saw this evolution of the space industry, moving away from the big institutional ESA or national funded projects, moving more into what we now call new space. New space is essentially new money and commercial. It's really what it means. It means that we're using new sources of money, which isn't traditionally government money or institutional money or agency money, to develop business cases using satellites. And the important thing is for us is Kleos, despite it being called Kleos Space, isn't really a space company. It's a defense company, a security company. It's an intelligence company that's selling a data set into those marketplaces. We just leverage space and our experience there. The IPO relatively, obviously, early in terms of our company formation. That IPO brought the funding in to allow us to buy our first cluster of satellites, what we call the scouting mission, which launched at the end of November 2020. We had a lot of delays with COVID. We must have been delayed a year altogether with regard to that launch. It was a very, very frustrating period. So this kind of slow period of growth along the bottom here, we had a long frustration with regard to our COVID challenges, particularly just getting satellites to space from a launch perspective. The scouting satellites, they had lots of different objectives, a lot of pressure on those. They were our first, if you like, in-space demonstrators that we could geolocate radio transmitters that are very low powered, handheld walkie-talkies, for instance, at a very high degree of accuracy. They had to provide experimental data to our customer base so that the customers could start to look at how they would ingest that data as part of their workflow. And obviously they're fulfilling both of those tasks very nicely now. They also have to demonstrate the ability to generate revenues, which we are beginning to do so now. Those scouting satellites, they're very close to that period now that they're out of that experimentation, demonstration, test period. So they've done a fantastic job for us. We've learned a lot through that process. Times that we thought it would take to bring those satellites online, it was a lot longer than that. And we've learned from that process and learned how to deliver our technology into customers' hands. In terms of then moving up the chain, our initial data products were released mid-2021, technology validated in orbit. And as I said, I'm very happy to share the white paper, which was released to the ASX just last week, that we presented at a technical symposium at the same time last week, a big one in the US called GeoInt 21, and that really shows the capability of what we can do, the accuracies, and why this data is so valuable to our customer base. We launched our second cluster of 4 satellites. They've already got double the collect capability as our first ones. So not just building up twice the amount of data we can collect because it's twice the number of satellites, but those satellites are already much improved from the first ones. Gives us a much better collect capability, more data, and more into customers' hands. Just last month, we completed an institutional capital raise, which puts us in a very well-financed position, very long runway, the ability for us to get to our growth in terms of revenues and moves the sort of business forward on fantastically. Got some great names involved at that stage, Perennial, Thorney, done to a very small number of investors, very small number of institutional investors, and we're very proud of that capital raise. Moving forward, we have a launch on the next Spacex launch, which is and further cluster of 4 satellites. They again have twice the capability to collect different data sets than the second cluster. So every cluster of satellites is improving our technology, improving our capabilities, and moving things forward. And 2021, we've got some targets which we're very far along with hitting already, with active subscribers, bringing a number of customers on board, building up an ARR, which is still in the beginning stages of that, in terms of our annualized recurring revenues, increasing that and growing that ARR, and showing how we're going to grow that in 2022. That's our objective for the end of 21. So in terms of marketplace that we're addressing, it's a really interesting market. The ability to know where things are, the geospatial data sets, this is the important thing here. So geospatial means anything from GPS, so accuracy, so looking at where things are or where you are around the world in relation to other things. Imagery, so taking photos of the Earth, looking at how the Earth is evolving and changing, whether that imagery is in the optical domain, so traditional photography, or in the synthetic capture radar domain, which is increasingly getting more and more powerful every year. But the important thing is that all of these imagery capabilities that are around the world, whether it's optical or SAR, is that they need to know where to look. The analyst needs to have that point on a map where they know there's a challenge. If I talk you through a little bit about the way the analyst would be working with our data in whatever market, whether it's defense or commercial marketplaces, they want to find the needle in the haystack. That's the really important thing for our customers. So we bring our data set in, and our data set is quite simple. It's points on a map where we've seen a radio transmitter. There's some metadata around that to give the analyst more information, but it's a point on a map where the radio transmitter has been seen. That gives that analyst straight away the needle in the haystack. They're able to then, rather than trying to analyze big pictures of blue ocean, trying to find small vessels, which is almost impossible from an imagery perspective, they have the ability to bring up an image of just a few hundred square meters or a few square kilometers, which gives them the ability to hone in and pinpoint that problem space, pinpoint the challenge, whether it's a threat to the border, or it's a threat to your assets, whatever it might be. They can find that very, very quickly. The faster you can get to an insight, the faster you get to a decision-making process, what are you going to do next? The faster we can improve that, or the better we can improve that capability to get the decision quicker, gives the customer that ability to take more action. That is of value to them, which is where we sit in. So we're known in our industry as tipping and queuing. Tipping and queuing really means finding the needle in the haystack, and that's where we sit in. Lots of different marketplaces. See, from maritime land perspective, the marketplace, though, if I can narrow it down a wee bit there, it's more to do with remoteness, and we're not able to, or particularly interested in, looking at what's going on around cities, for instance. There's much easier ways of doing surveillance across a city for activity. You can see people, for a start. So what we're interested in is those remote places, the parts of the ocean where the nefarious activities are going on, illegal transshipping, moving goods between ships without their AIS transmitters on, ship to shore smuggling, movements across borders, particularly where those borders are hard to man. There's an absence of physical border, very large border spaces. This is where we sit in there. Also, under the tree canopy. So we are able to pick up radio transmissions that are coming from a forest environment, for instance, that you can't see from an imagery perspective. So anywhere where we're finding activity in those remote environments where you're not expecting it, that's where we're adding that value, shining a light on that activity. And that comes across that there's obviously the defense security, as I've talked about. There are commercial applications as well. There's a number of applications we've looked at from mining perspective, oil and gas, particularly overseas assets that are unmanned, so remote. How do you protect those? You protect them with wide area surveillance, getting a clue with regard where's their activity around that asset that you weren't expecting to be there. Just in terms of why we see our demand increasing, the demand is driven by the high cost of these challenges. Whether it is illegal fishing, as I pulled out here, or threats, the maritime environment threats in particular, but there's equally as high cost from a land perspective. These are in the news every day. You'd be very familiar with all this, whether it is sanction busting, so state-operated environments where people aren't having their tracking systems on, but you still need to know where they are. How do we add value to that? Whether it's looking at as the waterways open up in the high north and the Baltics, with the change in the environment, how do we start tracking the activity around that area is very, very important to people. There's challenges around the world in this area. It isn't just one or two countries, the US, Germany, the UK, etc., that suffers with this. We have customers globally in terms of a data set. So it's very, 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 very important, the challenges that we're facing or looking to tackle. In terms of the business and what we're doing, how we're doing it, I think is really important. And we're doing it through a team. And that's a key thing. The two co-founders are still very much involved in the company. Myself, Miles Ashcroft, who I've been lucky enough to work alongside for at least 20 years now. Miles is Chief Innovation Officer at the company, looking at the forward-looking sort of opportunities with regard to technology development. What's important for us to not just gain traction where we currently are, but to create a sort of leadership position in our industry with a very nascent capability in all senses, is that we show thought leadership with regard to engineering. So it's important that we have somebody out there looking at what's happening next in the space industry. Or you can already tell from our satellite clusters that we're evolving constantly. How do we do that? How do we keep evolving at that pace is important. Joined alongside me there with our chair, Pete. Pete has been around since pre-IPO, is a fantastic colleague. Pete also covers our senior military government affairs with our customers. He's Air Commodore from the UK RAF, fantastic experience in European Defence Agency, in NATO, in the US government areas, and brings a lot of credibility into the business. Eric, Chief Revenue Officer, is a relatively new hire, sort of early part of this year, January. Eric was brought in to take sort of the sort of more conceptual, if you like, with regard to product delivery. Use his experience from being president at Bricon, moving into Maxar, how you sell imagery data, getting data into customers' hands much, much quicker. How you monetize that. Eric is fantastically experienced in that sense. I'm learning a tremendous amount from working with him, and I'm certainly honored to be working alongside somebody with such experience. Vinny, who was brought in again a bit early part of this year as CTO. Vinny was a former director of Spire, where he took or was involved in Spire as they had just a few satellites in orbit when he first started. But he was there through that evolution of growing into a large constellation, which is obviously our objective as well. And so bringing Vinny's experience into the company at this stage in order to, he's seen it, he's done it, he knows how to get those satellites into orbit and get them operational, knows all the challenges. We often say in our business, space is hard. It really is hard, and there's a lot of challenges with regard to space, but having the right team around us is invaluable. Herbert is our COO, based in Luxembourg. It brings professionalism and a fantastic ability there. Likewise, Ian, with his experience in the space industry as CFO, knows how to finance satellites, knows how to get data sold and into customers' hands. We're lucky enough to be joined by our US director, Karen, who is former NGA director and worked at the NRO, which are our two big customers, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, National Reconnaissance Office, agencies of the DoD. Karen, again, brings a tremendous credibility. So just on our business, headquarters in Luxembourg, our satellites are operated, run out of the Luxembourg office. However, they're supported. We have some engineering offices in Denver, business development offices in Washington, DC, where we run. The US is clearly our biggest customer in that sense, bigger probably than the rest of the world put together in terms of a customer base for obvious reasons. So we support and run a great deal out of our Washington, DC office in UK as well, with further sales staff based in Latin America. We've got 3-star general in France working for us, as well as in Australia, where we have a growing capability there as well. So we've got around 80 million market cap today in terms of euros. We've raised a great amount of capital, launched a lot of satellites. We've got 8 satellites in orbit. We are importantly extremely well funded. So we have 9 million in hand in terms of cash. We've got a strong runway. We're hitting the point of going straight up that curve with regard revenues, with regard exploitation. I think our current status is we've got a big pipeline ahead of us, 200 plus qualified deals in that pipeline. Great number of those are converting into contracts, into agreements, into whatever it might be, in order to start generating those revenues in a very short order. And we've got technology that's fully validated. So we've got both unique technology, which is of global importance, of economic importance, of societal importance, environmental importance, and we've got a customer base ready and waiting for that. The next few months are really about execution, bringing those two fundamentals together, and that's where we sit. So I'll take any questions.
Perfect. We still have 15 minutes left for questions. Quite a quick presentation. So far, no questions came in. So just a quick reminder for the audience, you can post questions via the chat or the Q&A option, and then I will read them out. So maybe just a quick question from my side. Your target was 50 active subscribers till the end of 2021. Is this still in line, or did you already overachieve your goal, or what's the current status on that?
No, we're tracking well for that. The challenge always is generating enough data in the right places around the world in order to fulfill the contracts. And whilst we have a certain amount of data over certain areas of the world, it isn't interesting to everybody. So, for instance, if I give you an example of, say, the Chilean Navy, who we're working very closely with. Chilean Navy are only interested in the coastline of Chile. They're not interested in the South China Sea or the Baltics or parts of the Pacific, clearly. So we have a period of time where we have to bring those areas of interest down. From a technology perspective, the satellites have a capacity with regard how much data they can collect per orbit. So they can only be on over certain places. And what we're doing is really trying to, not making any sort of value judgment, but certainly from a commercial perspective, you want to collect that data where you have the most customers at this stage, because we're in those very early stages. As we build out our constellation and start collecting data in different places, we're able to start fulfilling some of those smaller, but just as important contracts from a value perspective. But we need to be able to sort of build out the areas of interest as well as the constellation over a period of time, and that takes time.
The first question just came in. How many satellite clusters would you like to operate by the end of 2020 or 2022 or 2023 and 2024?
So in terms of end of 2022, we're looking at, it'll be likely 5 operational clusters by the end of 2022, fulfilling many different areas of interest and fulfilling different customer requirements by that stage. The objective at the moment is to get to between 10 and 12 clusters by the end of 2023. That will then be just kept in place. So the reason why it's a variable, I'll just explain that slightly, because obviously you would expect us to know precisely how many clusters. I think the customer requirement is evolving constantly. We are in a position where the threats are changing, then the payload on board the satellites, the requirements around that are changing. The customers are in a place where they're just beginning to really get excited about this, and so therefore their needs are evolving over a period of time. And what we want to do, our whole business is about developing a dynamic, a responsive capability that answers those requirements over a period of time. So what we're not doing today is saying, this is exactly how many satellites we're launching and this is the payload on them, because we want to be able to have that dialogue with the customer. We know where we can get to over the next year or two, and that will fulfill the current customer demand. But we want to be able to be, we're not dictating how the customer wants to use the data. If they want more data, we'll launch more satellites if there's a business case there for that. So not being too specific in that area.
Right. The next question is, who are your competitors?
So the marketplace is very early. There is a clear, competitor in the world, a company called Hawkeye 360 in the US, which are a great company. They do some good technology. They've got guys behind them, and are very sort of useful in the sense that I think if we were the only people in the world doing this sort of thing, life would be harder than it is now. But there is a great degree of excitement being built up around the customer base, which is related to both parties, if you like, marketing heavily in their own jurisdictions and working hard on that. So they're a good competitor in that sense. However, they're not, once you get into the detail, not really doing exactly the same thing. They're not looking at the same frequencies in the same way as we are doing. And there are differentiators there from a technology perspective, that the value to the end user is actually to bring in multiple data sets. It's something that I think people, whether you're in financial intelligence or certainly defense intelligence, you understand, people don't tend to rely on a single source of data because it can lead to bad decisions ultimately. So the way generally defense intelligence is run is you bring multiple intelligence sources in that are complementary, not directly competing, complementary data sets that enable you to build up a bigger picture with regard to what's going on. So see them broadly more as complementary rather than as competitor today, I think is important. That isn't to say new competitors will come on the market. It's a big opportunity. There is a fantastic business out there in the defense security sector. So I think there will be more competitors coming along the lines. I've absolutely no doubt about that.
Okay. And the next question is regarding the satellite lives. How long can they stay up there, and can they be replaced, or can you? How often do you have to replace them, and is there any impact on service if a satellite drops out?
Yeah, so the satellites have a design life at least cluster 2 onwards of 5 years. So we maintain their orbit using propulsion, and that keeps them in place and collecting data for a 5-year period. So at this moment in time, for instance, we depreciate on a straight line over 5 years. We have an interesting angle with our 4-satellite cluster that you can actually do the physics and the maths with 3 satellites, perhaps slightly less accurately in our case, but you can do the maths with 3. So 4 builds you in an automatic redundancy there. So if we were to lose a single satellite, we have the ability still to provide the data from that cluster. We don't really lose any revenues there. If we lose 2 satellites out of that cluster, it begins to get more challenging with regard to maintaining that revenue. But the satellites are nanosatellite market has matured heavily over the last 5 years, where the satellites are much more reliable than they used to be, for sure. And what we're doing is we're using the fact that the industry is changing and evolving and improving so quickly. You want to build that into your constellation rollout. So you don't want the satellites to last 10 or 15 years. 5 years is about the highest you want them to last, because otherwise you're launching satellites that are coming in that are far better than the previous ones. And so you need to be able to take advantage of that technology development and that evolution in industry.
Okay. Do you expect the prices with SpaceX going down for bringing up the satellites?
No, I don't think so. I think it's probably got to the point where the price is, I wouldn't say at the bottom, but it's certainly about as cost effective as you're going to be able to get them. So, I'll give you an example of that. The difference between our first launch and our second launch, we paid a third for a third of the amount to launch the second cluster as we did for the first. That steep drop in pricing isn't going to continue. It is probably bottoming out now for the next X number of years, until there's additional competition coming into that marketplace. So whilst it changed from being a seller's marketplace, traditionally launching was very, very difficult, it's now going towards more of a buyer's market as more additional launch capability comes online.
Right. And you said you always need the newest version of a satellite. So do you develop all the technology in-house regarding those 5-year plans, or how does it work?
We have a mixture of things on our roadmap. Some things we are developing and moving forward internally, some of which we work with our supply chain partners on that. So we have a range of vendors in the space industry who we're very close with Vinny and Miles in particular, that we set requirements, challenges, and move their technology forward as well. Some of it's also horizon scanning, because there are technologies being developed. The industry is so large now with regard to supply chain that it's important that you keep ahead of what's going on the near and far horizon. So we do a lot of horizon scanning in the industry to help drive our technology, as well as developing our own. You can't in-house technology development in our industry 100%. You become too insular. So you have to work with the fantastic supply chain that's out there already, particularly in Europe.
All right. Another question regarding the profitability. When will you reach bottom line profits, and will you plan to reinvest those or just pay dividends?
We have an interesting business model. Like, the company was really designed and driven around achieving profitability as early as possible. And the way that we've done that is by keeping our OPEX lean, broadly speaking, particularly in our industry, it's lean at least. We've kept it pretty lean. We've kept our OPEX spend under a very, very tight control. And we have invested in CapEx. That CapEx obviously gives us the ability to make money over a number of years. We're also leveraging resellers and industry partners rather than us building out 100 people in the support sales team. We're using externals and leveraging their customer base that already exists. So we have the opportunity to get to EBITDA positive status very, very rapidly in a very short amount of time, and we're absolutely laser focused on doing that, and then obviously following that, getting into the net profit status ultimately quickly after that. I'm not forecasting the exact date as yet, but we're getting closer to the forecasting of that exact date. I probably think is the best way of describing that. We have a range of internal routes with regard how we take the profit and what we do with that. We need to continually invest in our CapEx, and I think that's really important. However, there's a number of ways of us getting the capital in order to invest in our CapEx. Could well be traditionally the way the space industry does it in the telecommunication sector is debt, really, rather than funding it out of cash, because the satellite is an asset which you can sweat over a number of years. which obviously pays for the debt to be repaid, and that gives you the ability to do that. So we're evolving more into that traditional space model, if you like, which I think will be an interesting point to get to, where we're not needing to raise capital, but we're also able to deploy our profits in a slightly different way and get to those dividend deployment status as fast as we can. And that's an objective of mine for sure.
Okay, perfect. No more questions for now. Maybe we just give it another 30 seconds and see if someone else is having a question. Already, thank you from my side. I think the time is running out anyway in a few minutes. Great presentation, really interesting topic. I mean, it's the space sector is in the press currently all the time, so I think it's really interesting. And I have no more questions received in the chat or the Q&A function. So thank you for the great presentation.
Thanks, Matthias. Thanks, Mario. Oh, there's a question just come in if you want to.
Oh, yeah. Are you planning to uplist in the US?
It's another question I'll give a politician answer to. We are reviewing sort of all options. I think, you know, we have a fantastic support in the Australian market and increasingly in the German market, which is great, and we're very appreciative of that. But our marketplace is the US. Clearly, from a customer perspective, there is it's evident. It would be ridiculous for us to say we're ignoring that and ignoring the pull from the US. So we would certainly build it into our thought process. There's no definitive plan to do so. Nothing's being put in place with regard to that. We have talked openly and publicly about sort of reworking the board to be more independent, to fulfill different regulatory requirements. So I think that's part of that preparation work. But we need to be we need to be further down the road with regard to revenues, increasing our market cap, moving the business forward and evolving it before we really, if you like, you know, flick the switch on something like that.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you.